Hello and welcome to the final episode in our series on the 10 steps to cybersecurity. And today we're going to be talking about supply chain security, and I've got Paul from IASME with me. Hello, Paul.
Hi, how are you?
And if you'd just like to introduce yourself.
Okay, so I'm Paul Crumpton. I'm the Business Relationship Manager at IASME. IASME are the National Cybersecurity Centre's sole delivery partner for the Cyber Essentials scheme.
And you should by now know me, of course, Adam Gleeson, Vendor Alliance Manager for CyberLab. So the normal format that we follow here is we do a why, what, how sort of series of questions. So we start with, why do we need supply chain security?
Well, as a business, you want to remain in business.
Absolutely.
And supply chain security is right up there with every other business risk. So you'd want to look after the finances within the company. You need to be looking after the cybersecurity risk within the company. You also want to be doing business with others. So within your own risk management, you might also be wanting to consider what cybersecurity your supply chain above and below you have.
That's, I mean, the supply chain, our suppliers these days, and in the digital, the digital world, the digital office, work is quicker, faster paced than it ever has been before. And I've certainly been on the receiving end of this myself when you've got lots of emails coming through, and I think I've referenced it before in the series that when things start to get really busy, there can be a tendency to click things before you actually think. And if you're dealing with a supplier, especially someone who's emailing you maybe dozens of times a day, that can start to be an automatic thing. Oh, there's another thing from so-and-so. And the implication being that if that supplier isn't doing cybersecurity properly, with all the will in the world and doing great stuff for your own organization, if you're just going to click that link and they've been compromised, then that's obviously a serious concern.
Absolutely. And in essence, there are three elements to risk. There's a technical risk, so that's the equipment, the devices, the kit that you're using. Maybe processes going on there, and people, the end user. I've touched on Cyber Essentials. Cyber Essentials is a set of standards that deal with the technical side of that risk. Mm-hmm. So if you can eliminate one of those three areas of risk by making sure that your system's up to date, that you've got strong passwords, secure configuration, you've separated admins from users, accounts, and the like, then that's one element already of your risk management process taken care of. So that's how we see it at IASME, and cybersecurity isn't solely for those for large companies. It's for every business, every organisation, and it should be accessible to every organisation. So it's incumbent on us all really to get involved in that process and we're all part of that supply chain in one format or another. I think it's really important not just to bury our heads in the sand. If we're a business out there saying, I don't know where to start, but actually ask the right people the right questions, and you'll get plenty of help. I mean, companies like CyberLab, for example, that are a certification body, can give advice in relation to the very basic cybersecurity measures that the Cyber Essentials scheme delivers. So supply chain is ensuring that every step of every transaction that takes place, very much like a banking transaction, is secure, not subject to fraud in the bank, not subject to a cyber attack, because you put some measures in place, you've implemented some good processes, you've trained your people. You may or may not have obtained or achieved Cyber Essentials, but you've applied the elements of Cyber Essentials within your business, and it gives you a solid base from which to take your cybersecurity forward. These are minimum things we're talking about here, but if applied, they will lift you out of the lowest hanging fruit.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's Cyber Essentials is always described to me as the digital equivalent of making sure you've locked the doors and windows. It's not going to stop someone putting a brick through the window or kicking the door down. Fascinating as Cyber Essentials is, we're here to talk about cybersecurity, so I'm going to steer us gently back on there. One of the things that I found, and I think you touched upon this before, when we were first talking about why we need supply chain security. One of the things that I found through talking to customers is often when I ask them the question about what they're doing around supply chain security, the first thing that they come out with is, we look at financial risk, which isn't actually supply chain security. That's standard business best practice for interacting with suppliers. So I think that supply chain security is something that I'm really passionate about raising awareness of, because it's making sure, when you've got these trusted suppliers, they may even have access into your internal networks. I touched upon the email before, or they may be able to access web services and stuff like that. It's all well and good you putting these preventative measures and good cybersecurity defenses in place. If there's someone that's got a backdoor into your system because through virtue of the relationship that they need to have that, but they're not doing any cybersecurity, then you're kind of leaving that back door open, which brings us back to Cyber Essentials. But again, of course, I don't think the supply chain was part of that wasn't one of the controls of Cyber Essentials when I was last looking at it. However, it's making sure that if one of those suppliers is compromised, or it's reducing the risk that supplier is going to be compromised. That's what supply chain security is about, and that's why we need it. Is that something you would agree with?
Yeah, and I won't go over Cyber Essentials again, I promise. But just to cover that little point you made about it, Cyber Essentials is a starting point.
Yes.
For the technical side of your business. So if you're sat as a sole trader with a laptop and a phone, at least make sure that it's the most up-to-date version. And a supported version.
I suppose it stands to reason then that Cyber Essentials would be a great starting point for you to say to your potential supplier, I would like you to have Cyber Essentials certification, because that's going to give you a degree of confidence that they're doing the basics right.
Absolutely, but don't just take my word for it. If the government are requiring it for a multitude of government contracts, and increasingly in the private sector, it's a requirement to have. It's a requirement to tender in lots of cases.
Yes, I've seen that. Yeah.
There were some other benefits with it, and one of those, a statistic from the insurance industry in the UK, is that if you've applied the elements of Cyber Essentials, then you're 65% less likely to be making a claim on your insurance for a cyber risk. That's a huge stat.
That is a huge statistic, yeah.
So I won't keep going on about it. But
I think it warrants saying it's a worthy certification.
It's a technical fix only. Risk is wider, people and processes, and that's the point you were making.
Yeah.
Well. But I can't emphasise enough where Cyber Essentials fits within that technical side. Yes, of course, I use a phraseology often, the Rolls Royce may be ISO 27001, it's a completely different beast.
Absolutely.
A completely different security management system. CE is at the other end of that scale, just focusing on one aspect.
But I mean, by and large, there are a lot more small to medium businesses in the UK than there are the organisations that. I mean, organisations of all sizes can look at 27001, but it's a massive investment of time and resources in order to get yourself to a point where you're compliant and then to maintain that compliance.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Whereas Cyber Essentials is very much an entry point way of making sure that you do things correct.
Absolutely. And one thing that's worth saying here, even though it's like many standards, compliance standards are a moment in time, like MOTs. Actually, with cybersecurity, that should be an ongoing process. Your MOT
absolutely.
brings you up to, is a bit like an annual health check.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Absolutely, but all along, people should be taking the advice of, again, companies like CyberLab that can provide ongoing support throughout the year with that annual check against a set of standards, whatever standard you choose, whatever industry you might be in, with different standards that are available. That moment in time assessment is backed up by continuous improvement.
Absolutely.
But to not start is the mistake. To not start somewhere is the mistake that organisations.
Yeah, and I think that's we've kind of wandered into the next topic, which is what does supply chain security mean? But it's, again, going back to, it's making sure that you and your suppliers are being proactive, which is exactly the point that you were making here, which is why I tried to interject the next subject to talk about. And you touched around understanding and managing risks. What are some ways that you could do that with regards to, what kinds of things should you be looking at with your suppliers? About what kind of risks should you be looking at?
Well, you brought in trusted users. So, and I think I mentioned in my opening piece around, if you've got a number of employees, do they all need admin access to your system, for example? If you're just looking inwardly, first of all, looking outwardly, do you apply a trusted approach to your supplier or your supply chain, your customers, or do you apply a zero trust and you look for the cybersecurity measures that they're putting in place? The risks are many, and I can't think of a better way just at this moment to say other than to say, but doing nothing about any of them is not a good place to start.
No. So one of the things that you were touching upon there is around identity and privileged access. And in the previous webinar, actually, we touched upon privileged account management and privileged identity management, and we'll talk about that in the next section. One of the other key benefits of doing supply chain security, and you mentioned this in relation to public sector contracts, that it's a requirement now that you have certain certifications in place in order to even get a foot, to be able to get a look in for them to be able to apply. But this also goes to your customers as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So that you're demonstrating to your customers that we're doing our due diligence with regards to our suppliers. If you're storing or saving personal data with us, that data is safe.
Absolutely. Yeah. Am I secure? Am I still going to have a business tomorrow as a business owner? Yeah, I am. Okay. What do my customers see? Are they reassured that when they deal with me, their data is safe and being dealt with in the most appropriate way? Yes, it is. I've got all my technical stuff right. I'm training my people. I've got the right processes in place. I'm good to go. And that's really, really, really important. You can't do it all at once. And our advice is start somewhere and go on that journey. It's not a race to the bottom. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
And take as long as it takes, but take good advice. Unfortunately, there's some bad advice. Take good advice from, I would say, National Cybersecurity Centre, NCSC.
Well, and just as you mentioned the NCSC, I'm going to make another shameless plug to the security posture assessment that I helped to develop, which is based upon NCSC guidance. And the intent of that, you don't get a certificate or anything, but you do get a nice looking spreadsheet with a report. And we talk to you very friendly to give you an idea of where your strengths and weaknesses may lie. And that kind of brings us on to the final topic of how you do supply chain security. So I think we've already touched upon some of the points around this, first of all, doing something is better than doing nothing, and that you're not going to be able to eat the elephant in one bite. It's a case of starting off slowly, and that could be getting yourself through Cyber Essentials first of all, and then maybe starting to, once you've achieved that, ideally Cyber Essentials Plus, I think that you get a much higher degree of confidence with Cyber Essentials Plus than with a Cyber Essentials self-assessment. But then once you hold that yourself, you can then reflect that back to your suppliers, and you can say, we do this, we want you to do this, so that and we can say that, you can then say that your entire supply chain is Cyber Essentials certified. So everyone is meeting that bottom level requirement to make sure that they're doing the basics right. How do we go about? So one of the key things that I always see as a bit of a challenge, because there's no right or wrong answer to it, but when you're entering into initial negotiations with a supplier and you're just sort of learning, you're both establishing trust and you're getting to know one another. From my perspective, whenever I'm talking to new vendors and stuff like that now, I kind of got an easy job because they're cybersecurity vendors, so it kind of follows that they would be doing cybersecurity right. However, when I've been dealing with other vendors previously in other job roles, what I'm trying to gauge is what's their attitude to cybersecurity, and how you go about gauging that. Do you have any thoughts on ways to go about doing that?
Absolutely. Why would you, if you are operating a high street store and nothing to do with the digital world, nothing, you're not couriers or anything like that, why would you have any idea what to ask? So IASME have a set of questions we call questions to ask a third-party supplier. So in other words, we break down the mystique and mystery sometimes put around this whole cyber world. Proffered by some, not all, far from it, but proffered by some companies to make it sound mysterious and actually more difficult to understand than it is. Ask the right questions of your right MSP, managed service provider. Again, I'd say, CyberLab are a good example of a company that listens to clients and understands their needs and delivers on their needs.
Absolutely, yeah. That's
is my understanding. So it really is. Break it down into small bite-sized chunks. So again, I'll say start with a kit. It's no good training people on dodgy kit. It's a bit, I use the driving test analogy quite a bit. When you learn to drive, the car you were put in was washed, hoovered out, clean, tidy and well serviced. You wouldn't be put in an old banger. So we can have you take your test in that, and it can be nothing to do with the car that alters the outcome. Only you. The same applies to cybersecurity. Make sure the kit's correct, first of all, and then focus on the people, how to use that.
Typically, when I've been thinking about this previously, one of the first things, and I think this goes back to my time as a Cyber Essentials assessor as well, more on the Cyber Essentials Plus side of things than doing the self-assessment, but when I would be going on site to audit a customer, I'd be looking around for evidence and indicators that they are taking cybersecurity seriously, that they have physical access controls on their server room, for example, or that there's not loads of bits of paper around workstations where passwords may or may not have been written. I always made a point of checking under a couple of keyboards. There was that statistic somewhere that there's always there's at least one keyboard in the office with a thing on it.
It's things like, I'm sorry to interrupt you, it's things like have an asset register. That's a phrase that's used a lot by people, but actually know what stuff you've got and where it is.
I think that's something else that daunts people. So there was one of the earlier ones that we talked about, asset management. And there's lots of different ways to do that now. And it doesn't mean that you need to have a full remote monitoring and management solution for everything. It could be as simple as just having a very basic mobile device management strategy or something like that, where your devices are enrolled. You don't even need to be applying huge amounts of policies to them, but just by virtue of them being enrolled, you will be getting some information and telemetry from that device so that you've got an idea of what's actually in use in your environment.
Absolutely.
Active Directory, the problem with Active Directory is that over time, especially in busy environments, you can start to get drift and you end up with a lot of different objects within there that are no longer actually valid.
Absolutely.
So I would perhaps not recommend Active Directory unless you're really, really good at housekeeping and you make sure that it's regularly swept for undesirable objects or things that have left over.
We'll understand the back office function as a 365 off the Microsoft 365 that for those that know what I'm talking about. For those that don't, ask the question of people like Adam. The other end of that scale, for those that don't and haven't got the time, they're their business. Again, it's a plug for Cyber Essentials, I guess, but Cyber Essentials is a self-assessment. So answering the questions alone will make you think about the security of your business. So think when you fill out a home insurance form and it asks you, have you got British Standard 316572 for your doors and windows? Cyber Essentials is asking you similar questions to that. It's asking you, what have you got? How do you access the internet? Well, I use a phone, a router and a laptop. Great. Are they up to date? It's making you think about the various elements all the time, and that's the beauty of the scheme. unashamedly plugged yet again.
So it's going back to my point around trying to build a picture of what your supplier's attitude towards cybersecurity is. So and again, touching upon, these are things that will be audited by the Cyber Essentials. So what perimeter security do they have? Do they have firewalls? Are they dedicated firewalls, or is it just that they've got an ISP router that's got a software firewall on it, and stuff like that?
But you don't need to know that, Adam. If you're my t-shirt shop in the high street, for example. But what you can start with is simple as go onto the website of the supplier you want to look at, scroll down normally to the bottom, and look for some badges that might say ISO 27001, they might say ISO 9001, they might say Cyber Essentials, they might say something else.
Yeah, so I think we've really covered a lot of the stuff around there. Some of the other technical controls, software patching, obviously very important. Looking at whether or not the supplier is protecting and controlling data and how data is accessed is another good indicator. And how well they train their users. User training is something that I'm quite passionate about it. I used to be firmly in the boat of, why do I need more training? I haven't got time to do this. You're just teaching me to suck eggs. What I found, one, I changed my attitude towards training in that it's self-improvement and it's going to help me to do my job better in some capacity. Even the most boring training course, you can take something good away from it. However, with regards to cybersecurity training and security awareness training in particular, that can be quite a dry subject. And there are some of the platforms that are out there are quite good. Although one thing that I did find with some of them, great platforms, but their content tended to be a bit more oriented towards the US market. So that's something that you should always look at that. But it's a good indicator if they're using one of these solutions, then they've clearly invested in that software solution in order to invest in their users, to make sure that their users are good and know what they're doing. It's something I'll shut up in a minute.
No.
It's something I always come back to, that you can have all of the fantastic defenses and stuff like that in the world, but if your users don't know to not click on that email link because they didn't look at the address properly, they didn't look at the syntax of the grammar that's being used in it, or they didn't look for the key signs that it's trying to generate urgency, it's trying to imply that there's going to be some kind of consequence if you don't click on that link or do whatever the email is trying to ask you. If they don't spot these signs and they don't know to spot these signs and they just keep clicking the links, it's going to bring the whole house of cards down.
So yes, to me, and I'm probably as passionate about this sort of as you are, your staff are your biggest asset. I don't subscribe to the phrase, they're the biggest risk. They're the biggest asset. No blame. So your training is around somebody going, sorry, I think I've done something.
Destigmatizing, that's something that I've talked about before.
You want to absolutely encourage, along with whatever training processes take place in your business. The smaller the business, the easier it is. The more complex the business, the more difficult it is. I get that in terms of management of people and time and roles. But nevertheless, don't stigmatize people for making mistakes, and remember they're the biggest asset. The technical fixes, the technical measures implemented, whatever standard we're talking about, can only go so far until a finger makes contact with a keyboard normally. But it's at that point you want to be supportive, not condemning, and that's my piece on how we manage that risk element within our own organisations. But to your wider point around your supply chain, I've mentioned already, look at what certifications they might purport to hold, and those can be checked if you wish. But also, the sort of business that they're doing and the sort of clients that they've got can also be a good indicator. So as a rule of thumb, if somebody's purporting to have clients and they would soon be told if it wasn't the case, that, for example, a government client, there'd be some particularly significant requirements made of that company. So for you, that could be another little tick towards that business being safer with your hard-earned money than maybe one that isn't. I'm just using that as an example. It's not the only requirement, but it's these little things that the sole trader, can look at as well as the multinational with IT support teams coming out of their ears. There are far more SMEs in the country than there are large organisations.
Yes, yeah. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Paula. Cybersecurity threats from supply chain security attacks are on the increase. There's been quite a few notable ones in the last couple of years that have been quite devastating to the software vendors that had the flaw in their software. Doing something is better than nothing. A lot of people that I speak to don't really know where to start with supply chain security, and they just sit with not knowing what to do. So you can speak to us. You can have a look at the article that's linked below this video to give you an idea of where to start. And really approach this from the perspective that supply chain security is important. A lot of people tend to think of it, it's less important than the other aspects. If you've heavily invested in software solutions and hardware solutions to protect your environment, and you're not actually making sure that the suppliers that you're interacting with on a trusted level are operating as securely as you are, then that investment in all of your good stuff could potentially just be completely thwarted. Thanks for watching. That's all we've got time for today, talking about supply chain security. I'll see you next time. Stay secure.